What exactly is FGM? FGM is the non-medical practice that intentionally removes female genital organs. Often, girls are cut when they are still very young, in some cases under the age of 5. FGM is practiced all over the world, but is predominant in 30 countries. In some of those countries, high prevalence rates means that nearly all girls still experience FGM. There are 4 types of FGM. Type 1, clitoridectomy, meaning removal of the clitoris. Type 2, excision, meaning removal of the clitoris and the labia. Type 3, infibulation, meaning a narrowing of the vaginal opening, sometimes through stitching. Type 4, all other harmful procedures not covered by the first 3, including pricking, stretching, scraping, or even using acid to mutilate parts of the genitalia. Once more for everyone in the back, it is non-medical and has 0 health benefits, but it can cause a lot of other things. Severe bleeding, complications in childbirth, problems urinating, problems menstruating, problems having sex, mental health issues, shock, death. More than 200 million women have undergone female genital mutilation, FGM, with 3 million more at risk every single year. FGM is violence against women and girls, child abuse, sexual assault. Often it's about controlling female sexuality, a tradition to prepare a woman for marriage, allegedly to purify them for their husbands. Sometimes it's done to girls because it was done to their mothers, as a rite of passage or a coming-of-age ritual, or even without much of an explanation at all. It's a cycle of social pressure that's hard to shake, but not impossible. Actually, many people in these countries want the practice to end forever. And though it is often shrouded in secrecy, many survivors told Global Citizen they wanted to talk about the reality of FGM so that they can help end it altogether. We should probably mention too, FGM is not a religious exercise. It happens in Christian, Muslim, and Jewish communities, but there is nothing in any of their holy books that teaches it. Basically, FGM is violence against girls. So how can we end FGM forever? Education, teaching doctors and teachers what signs to look for and how to respond sensitively. Cultural intervention, survivors telling their stories to their own communities. Laws and policies, enforcing consequences when FGM is carried out and making policy changes that further deter the practice. The time to end FGM is now. Just head to globalcitizen.org/FGM Among Us to find out more.
Hello, beloved. How are you? And thank you so much for tuning in to the show. If you're a new viewer, thank you for watching. And if you're a regular viewer, thank you so much for watching. And thank you for everyone who has been DMing me privately for your support and encouragement. Thank you so much. You know, without you, there wouldn't be any show. So that's why I'm here. And thank you so much for tuning in. You know, I always like to share some jokes. When I was coming out, I come by train because I find driving takes so much of my time. So I was so engrossed in reading this book because my guest is coming in the show in 2 weeks' time. So I was reading her book. I didn't realize I had actually reached my destination until one of the train drive operatives came and said, "We have arrived." I said, "Arrived where?" "You have arrived at your destination. You need to get out." And you know what? It was so funny. That is, you know, have you ever read a beautiful book whereby you actually lost track of time? So that's what I did today. Oh, ladies and gentlemen, today we are going to be talking about FGM. Female genital mutilation. I hope you've watched the clip that we showed at the beginning of the show, just to give you an idea of what FGM is all about. It's a very sensitive subject, but it's something that we need to talk about. And to help us understand what FGM is and how we as a community can actually be informed and educated and fight against this tradition that has been going on for so long, with me in the studio is Dr. Sharon Raymond. She is the out-of-hours GP and medical lead and a safeguarding expert. And next to her, I have Alima. She is an award-winning leading women's and girls' rights advocate. She is a passionate campaigner and a survivor of FGM. Now, these two are qualified to talk about FGM anytime, and they can come back to my show and talk about it. Ladies, welcome so much.
Thank you.
And thank you for honoring my invitation and taking the time out on a busy afternoon. Thank you so much. How are you all doing?
We're okay.
You're good? We are good. So I'm going to start with you, Alima. Some people might want to know, as a survivor, how have you been coping with FGM?
Well, it wasn't an easy experience for me personally, and but fortunately for me, because I came to the UK as a teenager, and by the time I was 21, 22, the impact of FGM was already sort of playing its part on my body.
And at what age was it done?
It was done at 16.
At
I had my
16.
FGM done at 16, and my grandmother, who at the time felt, well, I thought I'd come from a privileged background from Sierra Leone. I'm originally from Sierra Leone, and she felt I needed to sort of have some part of me, my culture, my tradition. And growing up as a kid, we traveled the world. She thought we'd lost all sense of being African women, African girls, myself and my sisters. And FGM is a big thing in Sierra Leone. It brings the community together. It makes us
Is it like
who
kind of
we
a
are.
big ceremony that they do?
Oh, it's a massive ceremony. Everything you can imagine women wanting to be in their society is what FGM represents in Sierra Leone.
Wow.
So becoming part of that, girls tend to look forward to it. In my case, I never looked forward to being part of it because my mother had told me how horrific it was for her. My father was against it. Unfortunately, nobody told my grandmother. She wanted us to be part of the secret society and where FGM is sort of conducted. And she felt we were being raised to westernize, even though we weren't, because we still spoke our dialect from Sierra Leone. We cooked the same food, we dressed the same way, we do certain things that most Sierra Leoneans did, even though we didn't grow much in terms of growing up in Sierra Leone, but I went to school in Sierra Leone. I consider myself a Sierra Leonean. And nothing
But it was
should
that
change.
particular tradition
It was just that particular thing. For her, she felt that would make me more Sierra Leonean. And in my case, in the sort of the family I was from, I would get more power in my family, in my society as a woman from an affluent background, that I could demand for my place in my society. There were lots of additional advantages she felt, but that never materialized for me. Neither did it for my mother or her mother before her. It was just a concept for them. There was no reality to it as far as I can see, and as far as my mother and the mother before her, which was why my mother didn't want it, even though she had to go through it, which is why she didn't want it for us.
So it's basically the new generation are actually going to break the silence.
It's the current generation,
Yes.
the younger people, women and men. We all have a part to play in ending it. In my case, I was just fortunate in the UK. The health practitioners came at my aid, even though I detested, because I mean, growing up in London, it's not the cool thing to do when you're told you go see a psychiatrist or a psychologist or go see the doctor because something is wrong with you. Well, nothing is wrong with me. And I kept putting things away. But finally, at 21, 22, I was married, pregnant, about to give birth to my first child. And the medical person at the time, the midwife, said, this is going to be a problem. You need to get checked out. You need to get looked into. And so my course of challenges began at that time. And it never stopped to this very day. It just went bad, from bad to worse, bad to worse. And I kept asking myself, why would anybody want to let their children? I was the love of my grandmother. I looked like her. I acted like her.
How could she do such a thing?
How could she do something? Obviously, she didn't know it was harmful. She didn't know it would have this adverse effect on my body and my health, my well-being, my mental health in particular. And so I then decided, in fact, it was in 2003, what I would do silently was write blogs and write magazines.
That's how you got involved
Just
in
got
actually
involved.
fighting
I would
against
never put my
FGM.
name to things.
Okay.
I'd never, ever, because I was so scared. We are told never, ever to speak about FGM. If you do, something bad is going to happen. I had that
So
in
there's
my
that
head.
fear
It's
already.
just that fear. Even though I was like thousands of miles away, it could happen, it could happen. But I got therapy and I got support. And the moment I start to speak, women would come up to me and said, well, thank you so much. We have a similar story. And could you take me where you went? And finally, by 2012, I thought, well, I need to do something because my texts were increasing. My Facebook page became sort of a
go-to place,
go-to place. And so we began sort of the conversation in educating our community, educating our families, and letting people know that it was actually affecting us. This is no longer a cultural thing, and women were suffering in silence, and I chose not to suffer in silence. And I start beginning to make the correlation between what FGM was and what I was feeling in terms of my mental health well-being, my health itself, and how I was portrayed in my community. So in doing that, women began to sort of draw into that conversation, didn't feel intimidated, didn't feel threatened, and that's how we work at it.
And you're still working at it.
And I'm still working.
I just want to bring Dr. Sharon, Dr. Raymond in. Now, with regards to professionals, like teachers and health advisors, or even our doctors, how do you come into fighting against FGM?
So I think you've touched on so many challenges and issues with regards to this form of abuse, really, against women and girls. I think we need to be conscious of the fact that this is a practice that goes back some 2,000 years, and it is deeply rooted in certain cultures and certain societies. And so you have issues about cultural sensitivities, but we know very well, and we know from all the evidence and the experience of survivors, that there are so many complications that destroy women's lives sometimes. And so you've touched on the mental health issues, and we know that women suffer post-traumatic stress disorder, flashbacks, nightmares, depression, anxiety. And so, you know, the mental health complications can be very far-reaching and lifelong unless you get the help that you need. And sometimes even that might not be enough. But also the physical complications. We're talking about recurrent infections, spending a long time in the toilet when you can't pass urine easily because of scarring, trying to give birth, but because the woman is closed up in her genital area, it's a huge struggle, and it risks the life of the baby and of the woman, as you touched upon when you were pregnant. This came up. So obviously professionals have a huge responsibility, particularly if they're caring for children, you know, for under 18-year-olds, children and young people. And so the responsibility is really enormous to prevent the abuse, or to look out for the indicators that it might be about to take place. Maybe a child is about to be removed from the country to have FGM abroad, or, as we've seen from the recent case, the one and only successful conviction in the UK of a woman who actually performed in 2017 FGM on her 3-year-old child.
And it was done here in the UK.
In the United Kingdom, in Walthamstow. So it's really important to bear in mind that this is something that's going on both abroad but also on UK soil. And with that in mind, the Female Genital Mutilation Act came in 2003 and replaced the Female Circumcision Act of 1985.
Okay.
And basically, what that said is that FGM is illegal not just if it's performed on UK soil, but also if a woman or girl is taken outside of the UK to have FGM. And what came in also in 2015, if we're talking about professional duties, is, I'm sure Alima is aware of the mandatory reporting duty. And that means that if a
for all professionals to report.
For regulated professionals, so that's teachers, doctors, nurses, social workers, obviously midwives, chiropractors, opticians. So quite a range of regulated professions.
And is that happening?
Let me just explain what it is. So what that involves is that if it's an under 18-year-old that is either told that professional themselves, the child has disclosed, or young person has disclosed, and they're under 18, they've disclosed that they've had FGM, that needs to be reported to the police on the 101 number. Okay? And for professionals who are healthcare professionals, if they found it on examination, again, that needs to be reported under the mandatory reporting duty. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, because I'm aware from the Metropolitan Police the reports have not been huge. So the duty came in October 2015, and you would have thought that there would have been many reports in London. In fact, the latest statistics that I've heard are 42 reports in total.
Only 42?
Yeah. So it really is so important, as Alima is doing and so many other survivors and professionals, to raise awareness about FGM, both amongst communities, but also amongst professionals. But remember that there are so many barriers in making that disclosure. That's the problem. Sorry.
But how can we overcome those barriers then? If there's only 42% of reporting taking
42
place.
reports.
42.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a call on the line. We've got a caller. Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Oh, hi.
Hi, this is Bishop Malcolm. I'm outside the front door.
Okay, somebody will come and open the door for you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, bye-bye.
I thought Bishop Malcolm was going to ask a question.
I thought so.
we were building up.
Now, you're going back about the reporting, only 42 cases.
Okay.
How can they encourage people
In
to
the
actually-
London area,
In
yeah.
the London area. How can they encourage people to report?
Well, what we have discovered through campaigning in the UK, for example, obviously with professionals, there is this fear.
Okay.
Fear that if I ask a woman who perhaps is from an FGM practicing community, they may take the view that I'm being very either prejudiced or racially targeting them, but it's not about that. So what we as survivors and activists have encouraged the NHS to do, because it's done within the setting of health, it's a public health, and it's asking women not just around their FGM, but every other issues that comes along with it.
That's right.
It takes time, because this is a while ago, but it takes time. But it's encouraging health practitioners. It may also be what I said to a friend recently, that health practitioners may have their own biases
Of course.
and don't
of
want
course.
to do it. We know
Yes.
FGM is practiced as well, it's medicalized. But it's educating. This is why education is so, so important. Raising awareness and putting the responsibility where it lies. They have a duty. It's a personal duty in terms of reporting, mandatory reporting, that they have to report. In terms of the medical professionals and practitioners, they have to register. The reporting is about making note on the client's medical records. But if you're under 18, a child who's under 18, you have to let the police know, because FGM is deemed child abuse.
You know, that reminds me actually, when I was working for Terence Higgins Trust, I remember I mentioned it to you, Dr. Raymond. When I was working for Terence Higgins Trust, this was, I think, probably 5 years ago, and we were doing the HIV testing. And that was the first time I actually came across a young girl who had actually undergone FGM. And she was in so much pain. She just came to check herself and make sure that she hadn't contracted HIV because of how it was performed.
Yeah. I think that's a really important point when we're talking about the complications of FGM, that often, sometimes it can be medicalized, and in some countries it is. For example, in Egypt, that doesn't mean that girls and women don't then suffer complications lifelong and they don't die. And in fact, there was a case in Egypt of a girl dying after having FGM in a clinic in 2013. But obviously, when it's done completely non-medicalized and unsterile, non-sterile conditions, when raw equipment tools are used to cut one girl after another, obviously infections such as HIV, hepatitis can be transferred to one after the other. But I think you've raised a really important point, and I want to highlight it. You were talking about asking the question, and that is a huge challenge for professionals, and so it's really important that there's an automatic question asking. So this so antenatally, every woman is asked, have you had FGM? It doesn't matter what community she appears to come from, or what appearance she has
but it's
externally.
true, isn't it? Because you might be a white lady married to...
Totally,
So, So when I train, for example, I say to my nurses, for example, I said, just like I would come into your clinic, say I'm going away on holiday, you're probably going to give me the 101 on like the tropical diseases, where I'm going, don't have sex, on protected sex. It's the same when it comes to FGM. You could simply just ask that question. And in fact, most women want you to ask, because believe it or not, in communities where FGM is practiced, this is not a statistics, by the way, we sort of hold our medical practitioners in high esteem. We respect their word, we take their word. So I always say to practitioners when I'm training them, use that as your leverage, because we respect you, we look up to you. Whatever you tell us, we will do. We will act on. So be comfortable. Ask. I want you to ask me, how are you today? Because that's what you usually would say. How is
Not
your
just
health?
come in for treatment and then walk
we're
out.
not talking about smoking, stop smoking, cancer. You might as well just ask me there, have you had any procedure done down below, which is what FGM is, if you don't want to say the word FGM. Because again, why we're here, we need to educate our community. There is no biasness. Yes, there are a handful, maybe 1%, 2% professionals that may have an issue with yourself, but in most cases, they are there to help us. This is the nurses, social workers, the police, and I think when we begin to be honest with ourselves as a community in addressing issues such as violence against women and girls, we begin to understand it's in our best interest. A lot of us are now working closely with authorities to educate ourselves and to educate them. We are part of the discourse. We are part of the policy. We are part of the law. So when you are asked, a female is asked, they have asked 20 of us before they got to you.
That's
The
true.
question was designed by a survivor.
What I wanted to add, so we know now that antenatally all women are asked because of the risks in childbirth of having a baby when a woman has had particularly the type 3 FGM, where most of the external genitalia is closed, and therefore you might be risking the woman's life and the baby's life if she gives birth without having a procedure to reverse that prior to coming to give birth. And what we have recently formed, and this was the Guardian article that you were referring to previously, what I've recently formed with certain professional colleagues is an anti-FGM network. And the view behind that is to consolidate and coalesce the different parties that are working, voluntary sector, police, political movers and shakers, and healthcare and so on, and to really push for certain key asks that we've got. And one of the key asks that I think is really important is not just asking every woman antenatally, but when every woman or girl comes for a new patient check to her GP, she's asked, do you have a family history of, diabetes or TB?
I mean, that's good.
Yeah. So we would like blanket screening. So every woman and girl coming to a GP surgery, because that's where most people belong to a GP surgery, very few don't, and to ask them, have you had FGM? Because that tells us about what complications she might be suffering, both physical and psychological, mental health wise, and also the risks possibly to her children and to the wider community. And we are there to help at the end of the day as healthcare professionals, not to penalise.
No. And how does the safeguarding come into play?
So
Because you're a safeguarding lead.
Yeah, so the safeguarding comes into play because we know, and it's recognised not just nationally but internationally, that female genital mutilation is a safeguarding issue. It's a form of abuse against women and girls. We've spoken, Alima's referred to violence against women and girls, and it falls under that umbrella, under that category. And that means, therefore, that professionals have a duty, both in health and social care, teachers and so on, we have a duty to protect girls certainly when they're in schooling, and also after that time women as well, and also don't forget vulnerable adults. They may have learning disabilities or mental health issues. These individuals need to be protected against FGM being performed.
And can I just also include that in the new Act of 2015, the Serious Crime Act, parents have a responsibility of safeguarding and protecting their children. So it's incumbent on us as parents, just as we would with any abuse that children face, we have to protect our children. So it's important for women, men, young boys, young girls to be aware of what FGM is, which is why we even accompany the police to the airports. If you're traveling to countries where FGM is practiced, for example, is to raise the awareness, to say you're going to Sierra Leone, or you're going to Kenya, you're going to Singapore or Malaysia or Indonesia. These countries have these practices. We have done this many years before, not just on FGM, but on other issues, trafficking, drug carrying, people carrying drugs, raising awareness at the source within the communities where this is happening. And I think we're beginning to see change. And we'll encourage people to either log into the program today. If they have got questions that they would like to ask, probably not publicly, but would like to reach any of us.
They can call in later on.
Yes, because we really would like to
I'm just conscious of the time. Just about 30 seconds each. If you can just look into the middle camera and just please advise our viewers on what to do and how.
Well, for women in particular like myself, don't be scared that if you're asked by a nurse or a doctor if you had FGM, they're not trying to put you on the spot or to ask you strange questions. Know that they care about your health. In terms of community, this is not a finger being pointed at people from, say, Africa, or the Middle East or Asia. FGM, female genital mutilation, in some communities is called cutting or circumcision. It's now a global problem. If you're not targeted in the UK, you'll be targeted in the US, Australia, and everywhere else. So get informed, get information. There's loads of information online, and I would encourage you to log on and find out for yourself or reach out to us.
Thank you so much, Alima. Raymond?
Yeah, I think it's important for communities, for individuals to be aware of what the complications might be of performing FGM or aiding and abetting, let's say, the performing of FGM on women and girls. Obviously, the effects, the impact could be lifelong, both physical and mental health issues. I can think of an example of a very active survivor. I'm sure you know, I won't mention her name, but she works in a part of London, and she told the story about herself as a young child. Her and her sister had FGM performed on them, and she suffered for so many years, and she went back to her father and said to him, Daddy, look, this is what happened to me as a result of what happened. I know you did it. You thought it was an act of love for me to be part of the community, for me to come of age, for me to be seen as chaste and pure, but actually look what happened to me. And when he heard all the suffering that she had undergone, he in fact cried along with her, and he said, if I would have known, I never would have given a hand to
So
this.
it's all about education.
It is all about education, and the help is absolutely out there. You can go online. There's a national FGM centre. There's an FGM helpline that the NSPCC run. There are
Yeah,
FGM
in which we put
midwives.
the number at the bottom, yes.
There are FGM midwives up and down the country who are there to help, and they can be contacted independently. You don't need to be referred, and you can go to a completely different area, so no one needs to know.
Thank you so much, Alima and Dr. Raymond. Thank you so much for coming. I know time is of the essence here. I wish I could extend the time to like an hour. It's a very important issue that we need to talk about. Maybe we can do a Facebook Live sometime later on, you know, to continue with this conversation. I just want to finish with a quote from a guy called Joseph Osigwe. He says, to cut off the sensitive sexual organ of a girl is directly against the honesty of nature, a distortion of her womanhood, an abuse of her fundamental human rights. Mothers, aunties, daughters, wherever you are, please be informed and do not put your nieces under this horrible, horrible, painful act. Education is key, and we are here to help. Until next time, thank you so much for tuning in. God bless.